He had lived alone for 8 years, speaking only to his horses and the wind. But when 10 Shoshone women appeared at his gate that stormy night, begging for shelter, Jasper Cole would face the hardest choice of his life. Because the men hunting them were already close enough to smell the smoke from his chimney. How did a man who had sworn off the world find himself standing at the crossroads of life and death, with the fate of strangers in his hands? If you've ever been caught between right and wrong like that, stay, this story is for you. The rain hammered against the wooden shutters of Jasper Cole's cabin like bullets, each drop a relentless reminder of why decent folks stayed indoors when nature turned violent. Jasper sat by his fireplace, the quiet crackle of the flames the only sound he usually welcomed. He was mending a bridle that had seen better days, his hands, calloused and strong, moving with practiced efficiency. Nobody came to his ranch, Copperhead Pass. Not anymore. Not since he'd made it brutally clear that Jasper Cole wanted nothing to do with the world beyond his fence line. 8 years of self-imposed exile had hardened him, carving deeper lines into his weathered face, deepening the shadows in his gray-blue eyes. He had built his solitude stone by stone, a fortress against a world that had taken everything he held dear. The ghost of his past clung to him like the scent of pine smoke in his cabin. 8 years ago, a brutal massacre, not unlike the ones whispered about across the Arizona territory, had stolen his wife and daughter. They were just names now, whispered in the lonely dark, Sarah and little Emily. He buried them himself, side by side, on a small rise overlooking Copperhead Pass, under a sky that had seemed utterly indifferent to his shattered world. The last time he'd seen faces like theirs, filled with terror, was the morning he'd found their bodies. He had sworn off humanity, living only for the rhythm of his land, his horses, and the stark, beautiful desolation of the Arizona desert. He found solace and predictability in the unchanging cycles of sun and storm, in a life that offered no surprises, and therefore, no more heartbreak. The knocking started then. Not the polite tap of a neighbor, which he wouldn't have answered anyway. This was desperate, urgent, the sound of people who had nowhere else to go. He froze, the leather still in his hands. The knocking came again, harder this time, accompanied by voices speaking in a language he recognized but hadn't heard in years. Shoshone. His blood turned cold. The last time he'd heard that tongue, his wife and daughter were still breathing. The last time strangers, men or women, had come to his door in the dead of night, he'd buried everything he loved in the morning. His hand moved instinctively to the rifle mounted above the mantel, muscle memory from nights when sleep came with one eye open, a vigilance born of bitter experience. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the tone of the voices, not war cries or demands, but something that sounded almost like pleading, broken and desperate. Maybe it was the way the wind carried their words, thin and urgent. Or maybe it was the realization that warriors didn't usually announce themselves by knocking. They came like shadows, silently. He approached the heavy oak door, each step measured and careful, his heart pounding a grim rhythm against his ribs. Through the thick wood, he could hear them more clearly now. Women's voices, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. One voice rose above the others, speaking English with an accent that made each word sound like it had been carved from stone. "Please," the voice called, closer to the door now, as if the speaker had pressed her face against the wood. "We know you are there. We need shelter just for tonight." Jasper pressed his palm against the door, feeling the vibration of their voices through the wood. 8 years of solitude had taught him to trust his instincts. And right now, every instinct screamed danger. Not from the women themselves, but from whatever had driven them to his door in the middle of a storm that could kill a man in minutes. He thought of Sarah, how she used to scold him for his suspicion of strangers, how she'd say that kindness was the only thing that separated them from the animals. But Sarah was dead, and kindness had died with her on a morning when he'd trusted the wrong people. "They are coming," the voice called again, raw with certainty. "If you do not help us, we will die out here. And when they find our bodies at your gate, you will die, too." Jasper's hand hovered over the iron bar that secured his door. In 8 years, he had never removed it for anyone. But something in that voice, a certainty that made his stomach drop, told him that tonight, everything was about to change. Because somewhere in the darkness beyond Copperhead Pass, riders were closing in. And once they arrived, there would be no going back to the life he'd built in the shadows. The iron bar felt heavier than it should have. When Jasper finally lifted the iron bar from its brackets, 8 years of rust and fear seemed to fight against his decision. The heavy mechanism grated, a harsh sound in the quiet night, mirroring the grating of his own resolve. But the desperate certainty in that woman's voice had cut through his carefully constructed defenses like a blade through paper. The door creaked open, revealing a sight that would haunt him for the rest of his life, a tableau of profound human suffering framed by the lashing rain. 10 Shoshone women stood huddled against his porch, their traditional dresses torn and muddied, clinging to their bodies. Some bore fresh wounds that painted dark, crimson stains against the wet fabric, stark against their dark skin. The youngest couldn't have been more than 16, clutching a bundle that moved slightly, a baby barely breathing in the cold. The oldest had silver threading through her long black hair, and eyes that had seen too much death, too much pain to hold any hope. But it was the woman who had spoken through the door that truly commanded his attention. She stood slightly apart from the others, her chin raised despite the exhaustion etched into every line of her face. Blood trickled from a fresh cut above her left eye, and her dress was torn at the shoulder, exposing bruised skin, but her gaze held his without flinching, a raw challenge mixed with an undeniable plea. "I am Chayton," she said, her English careful but clear, each word pronounced with a quiet strength. "These are my sisters, my daughters, my people. We have been running for 3 days." Jasper opened his mouth to speak, then closed it. 1,000 questions crowded his mind: where they'd come from, why they were alone, what kind of men were chasing them with such ruthless efficiency. But the sight of the baby's pale, trembling lips, barely visible in the dim light, stopped his words. Some things mattered more than answers. "Come in," he heard himself say, his voice rougher than he intended, stepping back from the doorway, opening his home, his sanctuary, to the very chaos he had fled. Quickly, they moved like shadows, filing past him into the warmth of his main room, bringing with them the smell of rain and fear, and something else, the metallic scent of blood that wasn't entirely their own. Jasper had forgotten how small his home felt with other people in it. For 8 years, it had been his fortress, his refuge from a world that had taken everything. Now, it seemed to shrink around these women who brought with them the raw, undeniable reality of the frontier's endless brutality, a reality he had tried so desperately to escape. Chayton was the last to enter, and as she passed him, she spoke in a voice barely above a whisper, a stark, chilling pronouncement that sealed his fate. "The soldiers who hunt us," she said, her eyes meeting his with an unyielding intensity, "they are not far behind. Maybe an hour, maybe less. They will not stop until every one of us is dead." Jasper closed the door and slid the heavy iron bar back into place, the familiar thud a hollow echo in the suddenly crowded room. He knew it was probably useless now. His sanctuary had been breached, not by force, but by a choice, his choice, and there would be consequences. There always were, in this unforgiving land. The moment his hand had lifted that bar, his solitary life, his carefully constructed peace, had ended. "Why?" he asked, turning to face Chayton, the question an urgent demand cutting through the humid air of the room. "Why are they hunting you?" Her dark eyes found his, and in them he saw a familiar pain, the stark, haunted look of someone who had lost everything and somehow lived to tell about it. "Because we ran instead of dying quietly," she replied, her voice gaining a steely edge. "Because we chose to live when they expected us to accept death. Because some of us fought back when they burned our village and killed our men." The baby in the young woman's arms made a weak, pitiful sound, a tiny cry that pierced the tense air. Chayton's jaw tightened, her voice dropping to a fierce, vengeful whisper. "And because one of their officers will not see morning if we live to tell what he did to my youngest sister." Jasper felt something cold settle in his stomach. He'd known soldiers like that. Men who wore uniforms but had forgotten what honor meant. Men who took what they wanted and killed anyone who might speak of it later. If you think the character made the right choice, please like to spread the kindness. "How many are coming?" Jasper asked, his voice low, his mind already shifting into the grim calculations of survival. 8, maybe 10. Chayton replied, her gaze sharp, assessing his readiness. "Led by a Captain Thorne. He has been hunting Shoshone villages for months, claiming we are hostile. But his real enemy is anyone who might report what kind of man he truly is." Jasper moved to the front window, peering through a narrow gap in the wooden shutters at the storm-lashed darkness beyond his fence. Nothing moved that he could see, but that meant little. Professional killers knew how to move unseen, especially when they thought their prey was cornered, trapped. His 8 years of isolation had honed his senses, but they were still human senses. He needed more. He needed a plan. He turned back to the women who were now clustered near his fireplace, drawn by the warmth. Some were tending to fresh wounds, tearing strips of fabric from their dresses to bind gashes, while others comforted the youngest among them, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and a fierce, unyielding resolve. They looked like survivors, not warriors, but Jasper had learned long ago, in the crucible of his own tragedy, that survival sometimes required a man to become something he'd never planned to be, something beyond what the eye could see. These women, despite their outward appearance of vulnerability, carried an unseen strength, a determination that resonated with something deep within his own hardened soul. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that his quiet life was over. The battle he had tried so desperately to outrun had arrived at his doorstep. "There is a cellar beneath the kitchen," Jasper said to Chayton, his voice low, his words measured. "Stone walls, hidden entrance. It might hold all of you, but it'll be cramped." Chayton shook her head slowly, her gaze meeting his with an unwavering intensity. "If they search and find us, you die with us. If they find an empty house with signs that people were here, they might believe you were not involved." Her words were a quiet challenge, a refusal to drag him down with them, a selfless act that pierced his cynicism. "We will not make you an enemy of the United States Army." Jasper almost laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. 8 years too late for that conversation. "Lady," he said, his voice hard, filled with the echo of old pain, "I became their enemy the day I decided to live past what they did to my family." His eyes met hers, and in them, she saw the depths of his own unspoken trauma, a shared wound. "The only question now is whether we run, or whether we make them pay for coming here." Something flickered in Chayton's eyes. Surprise, recognition, maybe even hope. The storm outside was beginning to weaken, its furious drumming fading to a more subdued patter against the roof. And with it, the cover that had protected them this far was dissolving. Because in the distance, barely audible over the dying wind, came the unmistakable sound of horses moving through mud, their hooves squelching, and the low, confident voices of men who thought they had their prey cornered, their victory assured. The sound was a death knell for Jasper's quiet life, but also, surprisingly, a spark for something long dormant within him. The sound of approaching horses cut through the waning storm like a death sentence. Jasper moved with the efficiency of a man who had survived by thinking 3 steps ahead, grabbing his rifle and a box of ammunition from the cabinet. But as he turned back to the women, he saw something that stopped him cold, something that erased any lingering doubt about their true nature. Chayton was no longer the desperate refugee who had begged at his door. She stood differently now, her posture straight and commanding, and in her hands was a knife that gleamed with more than just firelight. The other women had transformed too, some clutching weapons they'd hidden beneath their torn dresses, small axes, sharpened stones, knives identical to Chayton's. Others positioned themselves with the practiced ease of people who had fought before, their eyes hard, their movements fluid and silent. "You are not helpless," Jasper said, understanding flooding through him, a dawning realization that both thrilled and terrified him. "We never were," Chayton replied, her voice carrying a hardness that matched the steel in her grip, a quiet pride. "But sometimes it is better to let men think what they wish to think. Captain Thorne believes he is hunting frightened women who will cower and beg. He's about to learn otherwise." The youngest woman with the baby moved toward the back of the house without being told, and 2 others followed her. They knew what they were doing. They had planned for this moment, a silent choreography of survival and vengeance. Jasper realized he wasn't sheltering helpless refugees. He was harboring warriors who had been playing a longer, more dangerous game than he'd understood. "How many men have you killed?" he asked Chayton directly, the question sharp, unvarnished. Her dark eyes met his without shame, without hesitation. Enough to know that Thorne's soldiers are not the first to underestimate Shoshone women. They will not be the last, but they may be the most surprised. Outside, the voices grew clearer. Men calling to each other through the rain, coordinating their approach. Jasper could make out at least 6 distinct voices, maybe more. Professional soldiers, yes, but operating in territory they didn't understand, hunting prey they had completely misjudged. Chayton moved with a predatory grace. "The cellar?" Jasper asked again, offering the retreat. But Chayton shook her head, her resolve absolute. "We run now, and they follow us forever. We hide, and they search until they find us. But if we end this here tonight, the hunting stops." Jasper felt something he hadn't experienced in 8 years. The cold clarity that came before violence, when survival stripped away everything except what needed to be done. These women hadn't come to his ranch by accident. They'd chosen this ground, this night, this storm. They brought their war to his doorstep because they knew exactly what kind of man he used to be, before grief had turned him into a hermit. He felt the old instincts stir, the tactical mind that had kept him alive in desperate skirmishes. "What do you need from me?" he asked, a grim acceptance in his voice. Chayton's smile was sharp as her blade, a chilling promise. "Captain Thorne expects to find helpless women. Instead, he will find us. But when his men see a white rancher fighting alongside Shoshone, they will hesitate. That hesitation will cost them everything. A horse nickered close to the house, and heavy boots splashed through the mud outside. Someone was moving around the building, checking for exits, planning their assault. In minutes, they would be inside, expecting to find cowering victims. Jasper checked his rifle, ensuring a round was chambered. Sarah's voice, a faint echo from the past, whispered in his memory, reminding him that kindness was what separated them from animals. But kindness, he was learning, sometimes wore the face of violence when it was the only thing standing between innocence and evil. "There is something else," Chayton said quietly, her voice grave. "When this is over, if we survive, you cannot stay here. Thorn's death will bring questions, investigations. They will come looking for answers." Jasper nodded. He'd known that the moment he'd opened his door. 8 years of peace was ending tonight. But maybe that was how it was supposed to be. Maybe some men weren't meant to hide from the world forever. Outside, a voice rang through the storm, commanding, arrogant, certain of victory. "I know you're in there. Come out now, and we'll make this quick." Colonel Marshall, Thorn's commanding officer, had arrived, and he was about to discover that some hunts end with the hunter becoming the prey. Jasper positioned himself at the front window while Chayton and 3 other women spread throughout the main room, invisible in the shadows cast by the dying firelight. The remaining women had melted into the back of the house, creating multiple lines of defense that would confuse any assault. These weren't desperate refugees. They were a coordinated war party that had been planning this confrontation for days, using their vulnerability as bait. "Rancher," Marshall's voice boomed again. "We're tracking dangerous fugitives. Open this door, or we'll assume you're harboring enemies of the United States." Through the shutters, Jasper could see shapes moving in the darkness. Soldiers spreading out around his house, taking positions that would prevent escape. Standard military tactics, but they were operating under false assumptions. They thought they were surrounding a cabin full of frightened women and maybe one sympathetic rancher. Chayton appeared beside him, moving so silently he didn't hear her approach. "The one by the barn," she whispered. "He is Sergeant Hayes. He was there when they killed my husband. The one near your well. That is Corporal Evans. He held my sister down while Thorn—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Jasper felt something dark and familiar rise in his chest. The same cold rage that had sustained him through 8 years of isolation. These weren't soldiers anymore. They were predators in uniform. And predators understood only one language: force. If you were Jasper, what would you do? Open the door and try to negotiate with men who had already decided to kill everyone inside? Or trust these Shoshone women who had turned his sanctuary into a battlefield? Tell me in the comments. I need to know which side you choose. Because what Jasper decided next would determine whether justice or murder ruled this night. Jasper made his choice. The front door exploded inward as Colonel Marshall kicked it open, his rifle raised and ready. But instead of finding cowering women, he found himself staring down the barrel of Jasper's Winchester. For a split second, confusion flickered across the colonel's face. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. That second of hesitation was all Chayton needed. The small mirror she held flashed in the firelight, reflecting a signal to positions throughout the house. The storm that had hidden the soldiers' approach now muffled the sounds of what followed. The whisper of blades finding their targets. The muffled grunts of men who died before they could scream. The wet, chilling sounds of justice being served with Shoshone steel. Marshall's eyes widened as he understood he'd walked into a trap, but understanding came too late. Jasper's finger tightened on the trigger, but before he could fire, Chayton appeared behind the colonel like a shadow given form. "This is for my sister," she whispered in Marshall's ear, her blade sliding between his ribs with surgical precision. Marshall dropped his rifle, his hands clutching at the wound. But Chayton wasn't finished. She wanted him to see her face, to know who had brought him justice. "And this is for every woman you thought was too weak to fight back." But as Marshall fell, a new sound reached them through the storm. More horses, more voices. Marshall hadn't come alone after all. Somewhere in the darkness, reinforcements were approaching. And the real battle was just beginning. The sound of approaching reinforcements turned Jasper's blood to ice. Through the broken doorway, he could see torch flames dancing in the darkness. At least a dozen riders, maybe more. Marshall had been the advance party, not the main force. The real army was just arriving. Chayton pulled her blade free from Marshall's chest, her face grim as she processed what they were hearing. Around the house, her women appeared from the shadows like ghosts, each confirming what Jasper already knew. Marshall's original squad was dead, but their victory had lasted exactly 30 seconds. How many? Chayton asked the woman who materialized beside her. 15 riders, maybe 20. They heard the gunshot. They know something went wrong. Jasper felt the familiar weight of impossible choices settling on his shoulders. Fight and die, or surrender and die slower. But as he looked at these women who had turned his sanctuary into a battlefield, he realized there might be a third option, one that required him to become the man he used to be before grief had turned him into a hermit. The stone cellar, he said quickly. Not to hide, to survive what comes next. Chayton shook her head. We cannot run from this many. They will hunt us across 3 territories. We're not running, Jasper replied, moving toward a cabinet he hadn't opened in 8 years. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, were things he'd hoped never to touch again. Dynamite, fuses, the tools of a man who'd once demolished mountainsides to build railroads, and later, other things when the war had required it. My ranch sits on a hill, he explained, his hands working automatically to prepare charges. Natural drainage runs down both sides. When the spring floods come, all that water has to go somewhere. Understanding dawned in Chayton's eyes. The dam. Jasper nodded. I built it to control flooding, but take it out during a storm like this. He gestured toward the approaching torches. That valley fills with 10 feet of water in minutes. Anyone caught down there dies, Chayton finished. But we would be destroying your home, your land. Jasper looked around the cabin that had been his prison for 8 years. Then at Marshall's body cooling on his floor. Home wasn't a place anymore. It was a choice. And his choice was to make sure these women lived to see morning. Some things matter more than property, he said, echoing words Sarah used to speak when he'd gotten too attached to material things. Outside, the voices were getting closer, orders being shouted, positions being taken. Someone had found Marshall's body by now, seen the blood, understood that their easy targets had become something else entirely. The youngest woman appeared with the baby, who had somehow slept through the violence. But now the child was awake, dark eyes wide and alert, as if sensing the tension that filled the air. Colonel Marshall is dead, a voice bellowed from outside. Surrender now, or we burn you out. Chayton looked at Jasper, her expression unreadable. If we do this, there is no going back. You will be a wanted man for the rest of your life. Jasper shouldered his rifle and picked up the prepared charges. Lady, I've been a dead man for 8 years. Tonight, I'm choosing to live again. But as they prepared to leave through the back entrance, a new sound stopped them cold. The cry of a baby. Not the one in their arms, but another, somewhere out in the storm. One of the soldiers had brought a child with him. Because sometimes the worst monsters hide behind the most innocent shields, and the hardest choices are the ones that test how far a man will go to save the people who matter most. The cry of that distant baby changed everything. Jasper froze, halfway to the back door, the dynamite suddenly feeling like lead in his hands. Through the broken front entrance, torchlight flickered across Marshall's body. And somewhere beyond that light, an innocent child was caught in the middle of a war that had nothing to do with them. Chayton grabbed his arm, her grip iron strong. It could be a trick. Soldiers have used such things before. But Jasper shook his head. He'd heard too many real cries in his life to mistake the genuine terror in that small voice. Someone out there, probably one of Marshall's men, had brought their own child on what they'd expected to be a simple murder mission. Now that child was about to pay for their father's sins. We can't blow the dam, he said quietly, setting down the explosives. Not with a baby down there. Then we all die, one of the other women hissed, her voice sharp with desperation. My daughter's life matters as much as that one. She was right, and Jasper knew it. But some lines, once crossed, changed a man forever. He'd been walking the edge of that line for 8 years. And tonight, he either stepped back or fell off completely. There's another way, he said, the words coming with a cold clarity. Harder, more dangerous, but it keeps everyone breathing. Chayton's eyes narrowed, a glint of fierce intelligence in their depths. Tell me, we make them think we're trapped. Make them overconfident. They'll send men to flush us out while the rest stay back with the horses. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the determined faces of the women. And whoever brought that baby, that leaves us outnumbered 3-1. In a fair fight, yes, Chayton replied, a grim smile touching her lips. But this won't be fair. Jasper moved to another cabinet, this one containing items that spoke to a different kind of warfare. Caltrops, iron spikes designed to disable horses. Trip wires that could break a man's neck in the dark. Bear traps that had never seen a bear, but had tasted human flesh during the war. 8 years ago, I turned this place into a fortress because I was afraid of dying, he said, his voice hard. Tonight, we're going to use those defenses to make sure other people live. Outside, the voices were organizing. Someone was taking command, probably Marshall's second. Orders were being given, positions assigned. They had numbers and training, but they were operating in the dark on ground Jasper knew like his own heartbeat. How do we divide them? Chayton asked, her mind already working out the angles of their impossible fight. We give them what they expect. A last stand. Barricade the front. Make noise. Make them think we're cornered and desperate. Half their force will come for us. Jasper explained, his tactical mind fully engaged now. The other half will stay back to secure the retreat route. And then Jasper smiled. And it wasn't a pleasant expression. Then we show them the difference between hunting frightened women and fighting people who've got nothing left to lose. The plan was simple, brutal, and completely insane. Chayton and 4 women would create a distraction at the front of the house, making enough noise to draw the assault team. Meanwhile, Jasper and the remaining women would circle around through terrain only he knew, targeting the reserve force and hopefully getting that baby to safety. If this goes wrong, Chayton said as they prepared to split up, her voice grim, Thorne's death will mean nothing. They will paint us as savage murderers and use our bodies to justify 10 more raids. And if we do nothing, Jasper replied, his gaze unwavering, that baby out there dies for its father's crimes, and you all die for the crime of wanting to live. Sometimes the only choice is between bad and worse. If you're enjoying the story, subscribe to the channel. The baby's cry came again, weaker now, and Jasper felt time slipping away like water through his fingers. Every second they delayed was another second closer to a child's death. Another moment that would haunt him if he survived this night. Move, he whispered, as Chayton and her team took positions at the front of the house. Jasper led the others into the storm through his back door. The rain was lighter now, but the ground was treacherous. Jasper led the women carrying the baby through the darkness, realizing his critical error. The baby was not with the reserves, but closer to the house, in a supply wagon. He signaled the Shoshone women to hold, then moved alone toward the wagon. He found Mary Hendricks, a cook, hiding with her crying infant. He quickly knocked out a guard and promised Mary freedom, instructing her to flee to a trading post. The Shoshone women he had positioned swiftly eliminated the remaining guards. Mary and her baby vanished into the stormy night. Their victory was short-lived. From the house, a chilling silence. Then, a new voice boomed. This is Colonel Marshall. Surrender now, or we burn you out. Jasper's blood ran cold. Marshall was the true threat. But then, a cry from Chayton. Jasper, we have Marshall's son. The storm paused. Marshall's arrogant voice now trembled. Release the boy and we can discuss terms. There are no terms. Chayton shouted back. Only justice. Jasper returned to the house. 2 Shoshone women lay still, their sacrifice not in vain. Inside, Chayton held a knife to the throat of young Lieutenant Hayes, Marshall's son, who had foolishly flanked them. Hayes, a boy of 19, showed genuine horror as Jasper exposed his father's lies and the true atrocities committed. Jasper proposed a different path. Hayes' testimony could expose his father's corruption. You want me to betray my father? Hayes whispered. I want you to tell the truth, Jasper replied. New horses approached, federal marshals. Someone had been watching Marshall. Understanding dawned. They could all survive. Hayes, seeing his reflection in Chayton's blade, whispered, What do you need me to say? Dawn broke over Copperhead Pass. Federal investigators documented Marshall's crimes. He was led away in chains, his career destroyed by his son's courageous truth. The surviving Shoshone women received federal protection. Jasper stood in his ruined home. Where will you go? He asked Chayton. North, to rebuild. She studied him. What about you? The man who lived alone for 8 years died tonight. Jasper nodded. I'm choosing to live again. I'll head west. He agreed to escort Mary Hendricks and her baby to safety, his first act as a man reborn. Years later, legends spoke of the night 10 Shoshone women and one lonely rancher faced an army. But those who lived it knew, the hardest choice isn't between right and wrong, but between staying safe and staying human. And sometimes, being human is the only thing that really counts. If this story stirred your heart, subscribe to Mr. Storytelling for more tales where bullets missed but hearts didn't.